Is this the right side up, or is it this way? Apparently, no one asked those questions when they were hanging up this Mondrian painting titled New York City 1. Because for 77 years, no one noticed it was upside down in a museum. Not the museum, not the curators, and no Mondrian experts pointed out either. The painting was unsigned, undated, and had never been exhibited in Mondrian's lifetime. There were no instructions either, as far as we know. So when it was first exhibited in 1945, just months after his death, somebody picked a direction. Apparently a wrong one, and that mistake stuck for nearly 8 decades. The abstract painting is a complex interlacing grid of red, blue, yellow, and black adhesive tapes, meant to show a skyline of New York City. The dark sky over the city was indicated by the denser lines at the top, which mistakenly went to the bottom. But really, who'd question it? It's in a museum. It has a label. You just assume someone already figured it out. But sometimes, even the experts get it very, very wrong. This isn't a war zone. It's London in 1928 after a sudden thaw and an unusually heavy rain caused the River Thames to overflow and flood the basement of the Tate. The water rose up to 8 feet, so high it drowned entire galleries. Dozens of paintings were deemed ruined or beyond repair, and some were lost forever. One of them was thought to be The Execution of Lady Jane Grey by Paul Delaroche. The Tate's own records marked it as ruined, gone for good, the end of story. Then 45 years later, in 1973, a curator named Christopher Johnstone, who was looking for John Martin's The Destruction of Pompeii and Herculaneum, found a roll of canvas literally collecting dust in the corner. Once he unrolled it, staring back at him was, surprise, surprise, Lady Jane with some water damage, but who, ironically, has survived her grim destiny. Today is one of the most emotionally charged works in the National Gallery in London. It shows a teenage 9-day queen, blindfolded in a pale white dress, reaching out for the execution block just moments before her death. The painting is theatrical, romanticized, and deliberately heartbreaking. And over time has become one of the most iconic depictions of British history and art. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? What do we have here? Onions, garlic, garlic onions? This painting by Van Gogh was known and accepted as red cabbages and onions for years. Museums, art historians, books, websites, everyone agreed. That is, until a Dutch chef named Ernst de Witte took one look and went, those aren't onions. And he didn't stop there. He informed the museum officials and made a formal case with a detailed presentation. He compared the vegetables from Van Gogh's other work and pointed out that the base of an onion bulges outward while garlic curves inward. That small anatomical detail was what finally convinced the museum's research team, along with confirmation from their biologist advisor. De Witte is a chef, which clearly gave him an edge here, but he also happens to be a visual artist. Here's a mini shout out to his artwork. The museum has since updated the name to Red Cabbages and Garlic. To be fair, Van Gogh never titled the work himself, but for over a century, people stared at the still life and somehow decided it was onions because the label says so. When you see this painting, do you think the same artist painted these? That's what experts thought in the 1930s. The subreddit Emmaus was hailed as a long-lost Vermeer. Critics raved, museums scrambled, and one purchased it and proudly put it on display. Well, the painting didn't exactly match Vermeer's style, but that's exactly why it was more persuasive. You see, the art world had convinced itself that Vermeer had an early religious phase influenced by Italian art. So when a painting came along that didn't look like a typical Vermeer, it seemed even more authentic. Except, it wasn't by Vermeer. It was by Han van Meegeren, a frustrated Dutch painter with a grudge, and perhaps one of the most successful forgers in art history. He faked Vermeers using old canvases and homemade paint, then baked them in a pizza oven to simulate age. But his method must have been pretty convincing because experts praised the brushwork, the lighting, and even the so-called spiritual depth. And he might have gotten away with it for good if one of his paintings hadn't ended up in the hands of a Nazi officer. After the war, Van Meegeren was arrested for selling a national treasure to the enemy, a crime punishable by death. So he confessed, then painted a forgery in front of judges and reporters to prove he was the one behind the deception. Van Meegeren ended up getting 1 year in prison, but when he got out, he was treated like a national hero for conning the Nazis. The Supper Emmaus is no longer on display, but it remains one of the most successful lies the art world ever believed. So the upside-down Mondrian painting? Turns out there was a clue all along. This photo, taken in Mondrian's studio, appeared in a 1944 issue of Town & Country magazine. See the painting behind the model? Yep, that's New York City 1 on an easel, the right way up. Still, the museum ultimately decided not to flip it. The tapes Mondrian used are now too fragile, and moving them could cause irreparable damage. So they chose to own the mistake and let it become part of the painting's story. Which is kind of perfect because the point of museums isn't just to preserve the art, it's to preserve the stories that come with it too, even the messy ones. One last museum mishap. A mechanic at a Dutch museum threw out 2 empty beer cans sitting on top of a glass elevator, mistaking them for trash. Turns out they were part of an art installation by a French artist. Don't worry, they got them back. So, if you ever find yourself doubting what you're looking at or wondering why something feels off, you might not be wrong. The art may be real, but the labels, they're just doing their best. Thanks for stopping by, and see you next time.